Let's Talk Native is produced at the LTN Studios on the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation. We break all the rules for Native media by peeling back the layers of assimilation and indoctrination. We may step on a few toes through our examination of culture, art, politics, history, and identity. But the real goal here is to bring our people together by breaking down what separates us. So, welcome to Let's Talk Native with John Kane.
There you go, and welcome to Let's Talk Native. I'm John Kane, I'm your host, and I'm going to talk about something I've never really addressed. It's a phenomenon that exists out there, and I have certainly been the victim of it. But what I'm going to talk about is tone policing, and of course I would be a victim of tone policing because my tone sometimes can come across as sarcastic or aggressive or dismissive, I suppose. All the things that somebody can say about my tone is what makes me a candidate for what is being called tone policing. And I'll give you a good definition. It says tone policing is when one of many ways that dominant culture polices people of color. It's often used, whether subconsciously or intentionally, to put this person back in their place. It doesn't just attempt to discredit what the person is saying. It implies that they are not worthy of the time and attention until they play by the rules of the oppressor. And these rules are often rooted in sexist and racist ideals of how marginalized people are supposed to act in society today. And that's a good definition, because what I found in, not just with the mascot issue, but in many of the issues that I confront here on this program or in person, there are some people who are immediately put off because they have a standard, and that standard is determined by white people. It is part of that systemic racism. They have a system that if you operate outside that system, that you have now not just discredited yourself, as I mentioned, but you've made yourself unworthy of any attention whatsoever. I've experienced this with my battle with my old high school over the mascot issue. I've had some people say, well, even if your message was worth listening to, once you belittled our community, you became unlistenable. And you voided, your opinion has been voided because you have come across as too aggressive. Yeah, and I've literally had people say, because they want to paint me as a racist. And one of the places that I've been experiencing this the most is when I did a program on apples and pretendians, and just mentioning the word apple and its usage that Native people, and I don't use it often, but that it's part of the vernacular, just like Oreo and coconut are for black and brown people. The fact that I use that word in relationship to the Native family in Cambridge that is defending the mascot, there are white folks out in Cambridge that, oh, that was a racist thing that you did. And because you are a racist, we can dismiss anything you have to say. That's textbook tone policing. And of course, the problem is, if me as a Native person, I actually refer to another Native person as an apple, which I didn't actually do, but if I did, that's not racist. Racism is about, and I've said this before, it's about power. It's about a belief that you are superior simply because of the race that you are, the race determines superiority. Now, I'm not saying that racism doesn't exist, but I would argue that we can get into a scientific discussion about whether race exists, or certainly that race determining somebody's intelligence or superiority in any way is debunked. It's debunked by science. So if any person criticizes somebody within what is identified as their own race, that's not racism. I mean, it might be offensive and it may be meant to be insulting or, or derogatory, and it may be prejudicial, but to suggest that it's racist is simply born out of not understanding what racism is. But see, that is one of the mechanisms that the dominant culture, the culture that can be racist because they have the systems skewed towards them and they make up the rules about what is appropriate. It is how the dominant culture can immediately, target somebody's conversation or their tone and say that nothing they say should matter. And again, not just discrediting the message, not just discrediting the messenger, but suggesting that messenger is not worthy of any attention to their conversation. And of course, in a situation like my old high school, I brought much of this attention to the, to Cambridge. I'm not the only person who's ever brought up the mascot issue. It's something that has been, debated or at least contested at the state level for over 20 years. But because I formally asked for this, the question ends up being, do I have a right to ask this? And of course, there are a lot of other things that come into this idea of tone policing. It's like, there's the whole otherism, am I one of them? So is there anything that I could say that would not violate the so-called tone police? Because I got to tell you, one of the board members at the last board meeting literally stood up spoke out in this board meeting and suggested that I had yelled at them and that I had belittled the town. And of course, that's textbook tone policing. And I asked other board members, I said, did you think I yelled at you? Did you think I belittled your town? Because I thought I was very clear that I thought Cambridge as a community was better than this, and that correcting this mascot issue was something that was going to improve the community. I wasn't doing it to take something away. And look, on my last program, I flat out said, yeah, there's some assholes out there in Cambridge. I didn't say they're all assholes. In fact, they're not. I mean, there are some really, really good people out in Cambridge. And there are people that I've known for, for 40 years, 50 years out there still. And many of them are still close friends of mine. And I've made new friends. I've also made some enemies out there. But I think this whole tone policing thing, and look, this isn't just about race issues. This could come in the form of any kind of bigotry, I guess. And it's always going to be the dominant culture that tries to create the rules by which they should be engaged. And and look, this gets down to things like, well, the United States essentially rejecting the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples because they say it'll undermine their remedies for conflict. Well, their remedies are their courts. So if we try to address these issues outside of what they designate the remedies, that's another form of tone policing. So obviously people spilling out into the streets with Black Lives Matter. One of the biggest problems that white people have with that is the tone of their protest. And of course they would find any means possible to discredit anybody who's saying what they're fighting for is justice, because it doesn't meet the white standard for what is the proper way to address a conflict. I mean, and let's be clear, begging white people to give up some of their white privilege has never worked. That doesn't solve any problems. It did, that's not what fixed, that was not what the civil rights fight was about. I mean, look, we do need allies. We do need to turn some white people because, they essentially have the power in their system. But even as we win some allies, we're going to create enemies in doing so. And so then we get, white people fighting each other. And that's what we're experiencing seeing it in the United States. That's what I've experienced even in the divide over the mascot issue in a little town like Cambridge. I mean, that's a town where 99% of the people are white. So when I go there and, people try to turn into an outsider trying to take something from white people, there are a number of white people who say, no, what he's saying is correct. But then there's other people who say, no, but his tone is all wrong. And that's literally what this board member had said at the last board meeting. She said, I don't have a problem with the debate. I don't have a problem with addressing this issue. But the way it was brought to us, she said, that activist came to town and he yelled at us and he belittled our town. Well, look, if you have a race-based mascot, you are going to get some criticism. And if you consider that criticism belittling, because the rules that you have for engagement don't allow somebody to actually criticize, then when you don't have a solid argument, when you can't defend your position, you seek out any means possible to discredit the more solid argument. And so what you do is you assassinate somebody's character, you tone police them, you bring up the old whataboutisms, oh sure, but what about this? What about Notre Dame and the Fighting Irish, or so you come up with all of these other deflection points because you cannot make the argument that a predominantly white community is appropriate in grabbing a culture of an oppressed people for their mascot. I mean, there's no compelling argument that you can make for that. So when you don't have an argument, you come up with other ways to dismiss those who do have an argument. And this tone policing, look, this has been going on for a long, long time. And, the whole idea of saying, well, the expression uppity, that's exactly where that comes from. The idea that white people will refer to black people who speak out as being uppity. That's the foundation of what we now call tone policing. So this has been going on for a very long time. I'm glad that we live in a time where we can identify and actually label some of these behaviors, because once you put a label to it, now you can talk about it. I mean, in this past week, as I was being confronted for my Apple comments, it was clear, and I wasn't even the first person to bring it out. Somebody else on the thread on Facebook said, this is tone policing. And I was glad to hear that. In fact, as Jake and I were talking about during the last show, he brought it up as a specific label to what I was experiencing. And I'll admit, I've heard the expression, but I never used it, or I never identified it specifically as I should have. So now I am. And now I'm trying to introduce you. Because look, if you're an activist, especially if you're an activist of color, you're going to experience this. But here's the thing. We shouldn't be beat down by this. I'm not going to change my tone because somebody is trying to tone police me. In fact, I told people on Cambridge, look, if you agree with me, but you feel like you got to create some distance between you and I because of what some are perceiving as bad tone, then by all means, because I got to tell you, my tone isn't going to get better. I'm not going to accommodate the tone police. I'm going to speak out, and I will speak out more aggressively. Now, look, I'm not going to curse people out in public. And I honestly, I don't think that I've been unpleasant about this issue. Yeah, I've called some people assholes lately, and I have pointed out that racism exists. I've never said that Cambridge was a racist town, but racism is being demonstrated out there. There's no question about that. And the practice of using a race-based mascot it's a racist practice. But I've always said, there are things that people can do that are racist in nature, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they are racist. And I got to qualify that, because some people say, no, if you partake in a racist behavior, then you're a racist. Well, I come back to the difference between ignorance and willful ignorance. There are some people who believe certain things because they've never had to confront their beliefs, because that's what they were told. It's what they were taught. It's the environment they grew up in. But once you know I mean, I posted a meme once and I said, the only thing more racist than white people using a native mascot is the response when you tell them it's wrong. Because that's when it really accelerates. That's when the camps divide. Because once you tell them, no, what you've been doing is wrong. And then if you say, go farther than that, if you say, not only is it wrong, but it's racist. Oh man, white people lose their mind. And of course they always say, well, you're playing the race card. Look, the reason I call the use of native mascots a race-based mascot, because by the definition that white people have come up with for races, I mean, just to say that native people aren't a race, okay, we can get into that debate, but we're certainly being defined as a distinct people with Native American, or native or indigenous or whatever the label is. We're not called Indians anymore. Yeah, I know the word still exists in the American vernacular, and if you look it up on Webster's, it'll say that that it's meant to mean. They'll even say that it means a Native American, but because the word on its own doesn't stand. So, but we get into these debates over not only what is the appropriate word, but again, what is the appropriate tone. So I guess what I want to make sure that people understand is, even though this tone policing exists, we shouldn't accommodate it. We shouldn't, if we need to speak out aggressively, or maybe we don't speak out at all, if we take to the streets, and if that sends too aggressive a tone to the rule makers about what is the appropriate way to engage, I say we create our own rules, and we have to speak out. And I don't think that we need to necessarily attack everybody who doesn't see things exactly our way. But I think we do have to be aggressive about it and assertive, and maybe not aggressive, maybe assertive. And see, that's what is, that's what they called uppity. The idea that you're asserting something that defies the white man's norms. And this is where tone policing comes in. So I encourage people to look it up. You can find multiple articles about, tone policing and tone police and that kind of stuff. I think it's important that as activists, and frankly, as anybody who wants to engage somebody in a subject, we should know what it is and call it out immediately. And, if somebody says, yeah, I don't like the way you said that. I mean, I think we should call it out. I say, well, yeah, and that's called tone policing. That's when you don't think I should speak about this subject matter in a way that upsets you or that confronts your idea. What is the appropriate way to address racism? I mean, are we just supposed to be nice about it? And are we supposed to be patient? Look, the old expression that says justice delayed is justice denied. If you think that we have to wait and we have to peck away at at whether it's the mascot issue or any other act of racism, I guess that Native people or people in general experience. No, we're going to say things that white people are going to be upset by, and frankly, not just white people, because the dominant culture also can influence people who are not a part of that racial background, and that's why we have Native people that will side with the race-based mascot issue, or we'll have some black people that'll side with it. But the thing is, when white people are going to judge other people, Native people or black people, on how we are permitted to address an issue, that in of itself is racism. That is the whole idea of white supremacy and white privilege. And the fact that they have to resort to tone police, though, or being tone police, is actually where white supremacy and white privilege devolve and diminish to white fragility. I mean, just the idea that somebody will deflect away from the main part of an argument by saying, well, yeah, I don't have a problem with the confronting the issue, but I do have a problem with the tone. I do have the problem that I'm feeling uncomfortable with the debate because of the way the debate is taking place. I mean, that is classically what is defined as tone policing. So while I think that we when we broach these subjects, I think we need to be factual. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't be emotional. But I think we should not immediately back off because somebody thinks, says our tone is wrong. I think we have to defend not only the principle that we're fighting for, but we have to defend our right to fight it in the way that we fight it. We have to defend our right to speak out in the way that we feel comfortable speaking out. I mean, I don't think that I should have to, ask permission from a white person how I should address an argument. Tone policing is not it's not a legitimate position by white folks. So the whole idea of saying your argument is valid, but the way you're saying it invalidates your argument, that's false. That is deflection, and that is attributed to the weakness of their argument. So, I mean, in fact, our emotion and our tone is necessary to fight these issues. I mean, if we come across too soft and too nice about it, it's almost like there's no urgency. So in the absence of us having perhaps a harsher tone than white people are accepting of, we actually portray it as it's not that big a deal. So no, I think our assertive tone, being uppity, is necessary. So, I mean, again, having really experienced, and not for the first time, but in a big way over the last several weeks and actually months as it relates to this mascot issue, having been tone policed, and oftentimes illegitimately so. I mean, when somebody says that I somehow was not nice about it, frankly, I thought I was pretty nice. But what it tells me is that regardless of whether I communicate in a real diplomatic fashion, the tone police are going to come out anyway. So why not take the gloves off? Why not be more assertive? And, and I've had allies of mine saying, well, maybe we shouldn't call it racism. I've actually had a few people who are close to me say, we shouldn't keep referring to it as a race-based mascot because it has that word race in it, and that immediately, is off-putting to white people. And look, if you're uncomfortable saying race-based mascot, then by all means don't say it. I mean, especially if you're white. I mean, I get it. But to suggest that somehow even calling the use of a native mascot a race-based mascot, that somehow incorporates too much of an assertive tone to white people, please. So no, we need to not only assert our positions, but we have to do it regardless of tone policing. We have to demonstrate our emotions and sometimes our anger and our frustration. But don't mistake any of that for weakness. I mean, the reality is, white folks, having their, demonstrating their white fragility over our tone. It took us a long time to get here to where we can actually show how, again, how weak the white position is on some of these arguments. And their demonstration of white fragility is a win for us. When they have to resort to trying to, argue our tone, they've already lost the argument. And look, I didn't go back to Cambridge and raise this issue because I thought I was going to win a popularity contest. In fact, I will say that I'm somewhat, amazed at some of the new friends that I've made. I'm a little disappointed some of my old friends have, are huddling in the dark corners on this. But, I didn't ask them to step up. I did ask a few people to sign a petition or sign a letter. And look, my friends did. But that's about as far as some of them wanted to go. And I get that. Look, I don't live out there. So I can go out there and offend some people with my tone and then come back home. But the other thing I think it's important to tell, just because we speak out on these issues in assertive ways, it doesn't mean that somehow we are miserable people. That's the other thing. When I hear the tone police saying, "Well, are you angry because you're jealous or because you're envious of how white people live?" No, no, not that's not why my tone is not satisfying to you. In fact, I look at the way a lot of people live and I'm thinking, man, what a terrible way to live. I mean, when I look in Cambridge in particular, some of the problems that exist out there, and in many of the, Lancaster, the same thing. Another school that we were battling this mascot issue. The number of white folks who were dying because of drug overdoses was incredible, and so the vulnerabilities of what's happening socially in many of these white communities has nothing to do with Native people or brown people. They're struggling with their own issues there that have nothing to do. So the fact that that I bring this issue up to someplace like Cambridge or Lancaster or any place else, or Illinois, I'm going to speak to one of the schools out there just this evening. The fact that we even have, these conversations, they are opportunities to fix some of the low-hanging fruit. Look, I understand substance abuse is tough. Depression is tough. Some of the mental illness that communities that, are almost experiencing in an epidemic proportion. I'm not even talking about the pandemic here. COVID-19, I'm not even talking about that. But the idea that what kids are experiencing, with bigotry and racism and bullying and being attacked, for a variety of reasons, not just tone policing, but being attacked. Look, these are challenges that do push people into depression and do push people into substance abuse. And these are all issues that we're all confronting them. But you know what? Sometimes that low-hanging fruit to solve a problem, like changing a school's mascot or addressing, oftentimes there's a battle over, taking some of the offensive names off, like squaw, off of a road or a river or a bay or a mountain. These are easy things to fix, and they're all justifiable to fix. So why not fix some of these things? So in a world where there's so many tensions, we can't feel good about making a correction. But instead, the emotions that are being, exposed and run bare over a school mascot. I don't know. Maybe there's something therapeutic about some of the white folks rallying around this issue. Unfortunately, it may feel good while you're fighting it now, but in the end, it's going to go away. And it doesn't have to be this winners and losers, winner take all kinds of thing. Look, the mascots are going away. And they're going away at a steady pace. The Washington football team changed its name. The Cleveland baseball team changed its name. And you know what? They got changed because we didn't mind our tone. We spoke out aggressively. And look, they didn't change them because of our aggressive tone. What they changed them for was because some of the financial interests heard our tone. They saw us on the street with Black Lives Matter. They saw what was coming, and they pressured Washington and Cleveland to change their names. Hell, we've been trying to do it for decades, for 50, 60 years. And it's only because our emotions did get put on display that the moneyed interest, the financial interest behind these professional teams, were forced to respond. So, again, be aware what tone policing is, and don't back down when you're confronted by it. But understand that you are going to evoke that response especially from the dominant culture, from white people who have no other argument against what you're saying. When you're taking a position of whether it's LGBTQ issues or whether it's, social justice or racial equity or, the mascot issue, whatever it is, when they don't have a compelling argument, a convincing excuse or reason to maintain a certain behavior, they will resort to tone policing. But don't back down. Hold your own. I'm John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. We'll see you next time. Yahweh.